Hi everyone, we're Team 1 from the Cathedral and John Connors School from India. I'm Aditya Agarwal, and my team members are Vyom Gupta, Vihan Gupta, Savish Pathak, Noel Chandy, and Arush Agarwal. We're going to get started with the first question now.
So what is dynamic pricing? Dynamic pricing adjusts fares in real time based on supply and demand. In ride-sharing platforms, prices rise during peak hours, which means more people request rides, causing the demand curve to shift to the right. Higher prices reduce the volume but ensure availability for those willing to pay. On the supply side, higher prices attract more drivers, causing the movement along the supply curve, which results in better availability and shorter wait times. Part B of the question asks for a diagram. As you can see, in the diagram, demand shifts from D to D1 during peak hours as more people demand the rides. Whereas supply doesn't shift, there's a movement along the supply curve as more drivers respond to the higher fare. Part C of the question talks about price elasticity of supply. It's denoted by the formula percent change in quantity supplied divided by percent change in price. As in this question, the quantity doubled and the price rose by 50%. The price elasticity of supply is 2. This shows that supply is elastic, which means for a 1% increase in price, the quantity supplied increases by 2%, showing that suppliers are highly responsive to changes in price.
In the sharing economy, information asymmetry arises when consumers can't observe a provider's true quality before a transaction, which can lead to adverse selection and market inefficiency. User ratings and reviews act as signals of providers' past performance. By turning private experiences into public feedback, they help consumers form expectations and identify reliable providers. This improves screening by matching users with reliable providers, therefore encouraging quality and gradually moving the market closer to perfect information. A key limitation is rating inflation, where users provide high ratings out of politeness, fear of retaliation, or many other reasons. This results in an uneven skew towards the higher ratings, making it difficult to identify high quality providers. As a result, incentives decrease and asymmetric information reemerges, reducing consumer surplus and overall harming the platform credibility. An alternative mechanism could be provider paid security deposits. By placing a refundable amount, it provides signals of confidence and providers are discouraged from poor behavior. While this promotes accountability, it may exclude providers with limited funds, potentially reducing access and productive efficiency. If designed well, it can ultimately enhance market reliability. Next up.
Question 3, Part A. The main economic rationale for classifying sharing economy workers as independent contractors is cost reduction and flexibility. This allows platforms to avoid expenses like health insurance, paid leave, and minimum wage requirements while scaling without long-term labor commitments and legal obligations. Risks such as income instability and job insecurity are shifted to workers. For example, Uber classifies drivers as contractors to operate globally without traditional employer obligations. Part B. Classifying sharing economy workers as independent contractors leads to income insecurity and job instability. Without guaranteed wages, paid leave, or stable hours, their earnings depend on fluctuating demand. This uncertainty makes financial planning difficult and lowers overall consumer spending, especially in local economies. The result is negative externality. Others, like small businesses and broader economy, bear the cost while platforms benefit. Second, this setup shifts labor-related costs from companies to the public. Without employer-provided benefits like healthcare or sick leave, workers often rely on government support. So while platforms cut costs, taxpayers fill the gap. This is another negative externality. Firms stay profitable, but public system absorb the burden. Part C. To reduce the negative externalities of classifying sharing economy workers as independent contractors, a hybrid employment category can be introduced. It offers basic protections like minimum earnings, healthcare stipends, and insurance while keeping flexibility for both workers and platforms. California's Proposition 2 is one example. It allows companies like Uber to treat drivers as contractors but mandates benefits like minimum pay during active hours and healthcare support. This model stabilizes incomes, reduces pressure on public welfare, and internalizes social costs while still preserving the platform economy's efficiency and scalability.
Okay, now moving on to the problem statement. As we can see, point one in simple terms is that many landlords are choosing to rent out their properties to tourists for short stays rather than to locals for longer leases because it's more profitable. But the result of this is that fewer homes are available for locals due to higher rents. Short-term and long-term rentals may use the same buildings or locations, but they serve completely different markets, which are the tourists and residents. The problem is the absence of clear distinction between these two markets that are competing for the very same commodity. So there's a very real trade-off between supporting tourism and protecting affordable housing. Next, we'll be looking on to solutions that basically tackle this problem. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so solution one, I'll be running you through that. It's the policy which basically states that coastal housing affordability, which can be done through state-led hospitality urbanism. What I mean by this very simply is that you can set up hotels which are PPPs. The rationale behind this is very simple because tourists are looking for a place to stay, and rather than going to Airbnbs, we are also providing them a particular service, which also enables local employment and increases wage rates for all citizens, which tackles the problem behind rising rent rates for housing in a dual manner. Not only is it increasing the income of citizens, enabling them to purchase more affordable housing options, but it's also reducing the prices, i.e., almost doubly increasing the purchasing power. Next, we're also looking at FSI, which basically is we're going to uplift the floor space index for these hotels through certain policies. And how this can help is depicted in the graph, which is basically the ISO quant graph. And we can see that there's an upward shift in the ISO quant. What this essentially means is that by using the same amount of labor and capital, we're getting higher efficiency. And we're going to be able to meet maximum efficiency and absolutely cut costs due to high density of people staying in one area. We can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, this talking about solution one, that's great that we're setting up these hotels. Ideally, these hotels will be set up near the coast. Now, talking about the distribution of the cost or the rent rates, we found out another thing, which we will be addressing through the Alonzo Mills model. What this model basically says is that price decrease is almost linearly away from the CBD, which is the central business district. In our case, the CBD will be near the coast, where most of the tourist activities will be taking place. However, we understand that it's very important that we stabilizes the prices here for the residents as well. How we plan on doing this is basically incorporating large government spending through setting up these large transportation networks, which can be through buses, rails, and networks, which branch out towards the inlands. And we plan on doing this in different phases. The first graph basically depicts it once we do it once, which kind of stabilizes the prices. And if we keep doing this multiple times through different phases, which is like a phase one, which takes us a bit more inland, and phase two, which takes us even deeper inland, what we can see is like this multi-phase bid rent kind of diagram, which kind of stabilizes the cost of rent almost throughout the term. We can move on. Okay, no, one second. Also talking about land reclamation, this is also another potential thing that the town could carry out, which is basically we can see that is done in Dubai and other kind of coastal places, even Mumbai, where we stay. And essentially what happens is that they can increase the land towards the coast where they can build these kind of hotels and infrastructure. Now we'll move on to the drawbacks of the first solution or the first policy. The first one is fiscal burden and long gestation period. My response to that is basically returns are multidimensional, which includes the stabilization of housing prices, employment growth, and future land value. And also we have to understand that there will be other policies coming up. I think in policy 2, which Vihan will be leading us through, which kind of talks about taxation and how we'll be able to offset this government deficit with a new form of government revenue. My response to 2, which is environmental risks, is essentially that we'll be setting up strict ecological zoning or transparent EIA processes and ensure that there's use of porous geotextile and vegetative buffers, minimizing ecological damage. My response to 3 is that basically, like in certain countries like Singapore, where government intervention helped initially, we plan on doing the same thing. And this is a short-term remedy for the current problem, and we plan on privatization later on, such that we do not hamper the growth of our town. We can move on to solution 2.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm proposing a hybrid STR taxation model that doesn't seek to eliminate STRs, but instead use economic tools to realign incentives and totalize community costs and restore housing stability. Let me break that down. So what is the hybrid STR taxation model? This model combines hedonic pricing with residency-based classifications to tax STRs more fairly and effectively. Hedonic taxation applies higher taxes rates to STRs with high impact features like prime location, lot size, luxury amenities, and seasonal operation. And the residency-based classification taxes operators are based on their connection to the community. So resident hosts that are living on the property get the lowest tax rate, then semi-embedded hosts that live locally get a moderate tax rate, and then the commercial operators, which are non-local and profit-driven, get the highest tax rate. This model internalizes community costs. It targets least elastic and most harmful uses and leverages proven housing economies from the hedonic theory. If you look to the graph on the right, you can see that as STRs score higher on luxury and profitability, which is on the x-axis, tax rates on the y-axis rise most steeply for commercial operators, reflecting the greater impact on housing pressures. Resident hosts see lower, gentler increases, rewarding community-rooted participation. Let's move on to the next slide to see how this affects the hybrid taxation model. If we look at graph 1, we can see the demand adjustment via the hybrid taxation. This graph shows how the hybrid tax reduces demand for high-impact STRs. Properties with premium features like beachfront access or luxury amenities face higher taxes, lowering their profitability. As a result, demand for these disruptive STRs falls, shown by a leftward shift in the demand curve. This helps reduce STR concentration in residential neighborhoods and protects housing availability for long-term residents. If we look at graph 2, we see the re-entry of STRs into the long-term rental market. Here we see the supply side effect. As high-impact STRs become less profitable, landlords shift them back into the long-term rental market. This causes a rightward shift in the supply curve, increasing housing availability and easing rental prices. Over time, this enhances market elasticity, encouraging sustainable leasing practices and restoring housing stability. Let's move on to the next slide. Over here, we'll talk about how this revenue will be allocated. We will look at it in a four-pronged approach. First, we'll look at it in affordable housing, which is supporting mixed income housing construction to grow supply. We will also look at investing it in community land trusts, which secures land for perpetual affordable housing, shielding it from speculation. We will also be investing it in housing stabilization, which funds rental assistance and emergency housing for vulnerable residents. And fourthly, we will also be looking into redevelopment incentives, which encourages adaptive reuse of vacant or underused buildings for residential use, thereby increasing the supply. The key benefits of this policy is it reduces demand for disruptive STRs by taxing premium listing heavily. It will also release housing back to the long-term market as STR profitability declines, and also it protects local tourism by taxing based on operator type, supporting resident hosts and discouraging absentee landlords. We only recognize one drawback in this, and that is that this model requires a high degree of monitoring and classification. We can move on to the next solution.
Right. Solution 3 is the creation of the Housing Investment Accelerator, the HIA. The backbone of the third solution is a municipal housing bond, which is issued over 10 to 20 years at a yield of about 4%. These bonds raise the upfront capital to build affordable homes, but they're not backed by new taxes. Instead, they're repaid through future rental income from the new housing. And to make them even more attractive to investors, they're partially guaranteed by the government and backed by long-term land value appreciation, which is especially reliable in coastal towns. So who actually buys these bonds? Several groups. First, local residents. The bonds are tax deductible, so they offer strong incentives for community members to invest in their own housing future. Second, we propose that local businesses such as Airbnb, Vrbo, and Booking.com be required to allocate 10% of their net profits in the region to continue operating in the locality. Finally, ESG investment funds and pension funds who are hungry for safe and socially responsible assets would also be natural buyers of these bonds. So where does this money go? Firstly, it allows the government or CHPs to acquire or lease land for a long period of time, which locks in affordability. Secondly, it also funds the actual construction of affordable housing units. This is built to meet the needs of the town's workforce, not only seasonal tourism. The next slide, please. So one of the most powerful features of the Housing Investment Accelerator is its ability to crowd in private capital. So we're not doing this alone. By providing seed funding and risk guarantees, the government basically helps de-risk the project, which encourages private investors to step in. This is what we call crowding in economics. The state doesn't have the funds to fund the entire project. It just has to tilt the risk-return equation enough to unlock large pools of private money. The second flagship thing about this is the reserve fund, which is another key layer of stability. A fixed percentage of rental income would be allocated to this reserve fund, which would be invested in AAA rated bonds like the US Treasury or other forms of municipal debt. If there's ever a rent shortfall due to vacancies or economic downturn, this fund steps in to protect bondholders, keeping the system low risk and creditworthy. So who benefits from all of this? The community housing providers, the CHPs, build units aimed at families earning 60 to 80% of the area's median income. This is the mystic middle who often fall through the cracks of housing affordability. They pay no more than 30% of their income on rent, which is a standard housing affordability metric. That ensures that these aren't just homes, they're long-term stable foundations for working families. Last slide, please. So on benefits, one of the key benefits of the HIA is that it adds hundreds of permanently affordable units to the market in the coastal town, which eases pressure on long-term rentals and helps bring down prices townwide. This isn't just a housing intervention, it's actually an economic stimulus. This is because the construction itself boosts local demand in terms of demand for materials, labor, and even other services to build the houses. This is what we call the Keynesian multiplier, because for every dollar invested in housing, we see at least a $1.5 in GDP gain. This means that socially we protect the fabric of the community because we also prevent displacement. By targeting households only earning 60 to 80% of the area's median income, the so-called missing middle, as I said, we catch families before they fall into financial insecurity. Finally, unlike banning STRs that push Airbnb and Vrbo types activities into an underground black market, the HIA works with the tourism economy and not against it, and that's why the black market problem will not be as pertinent as simply just banning STRs. Last slide on conclusion, please. So our solution isn't just about shutting down tourism or attacking an Airbnb directly. It's about solving this housing supply crisis with smarter tools. Firstly, we created public-private hotels in government zone districts, so tourist demand no longer spills into residential areas. Secondly, we fixed the incentives with a hybrid STR tax system. The most disruptive rentals pay more, and that revenues go straight back into housing. And third, we invest directly into permanently affordable homes through the Housing Investment Accelerator, funded by bonds and not taxes. Put together, we think that these three solutions work in sync, expanding supply, funding expanding affordability and preserving community without banning tourism. Thank you.